Welcome to session 3 of the Cadre of Coaches, during which we will explore the link between the PLP and MTSS. Thank you for joining us this evening. This session's objectives are to be able to identify direct connections between MTSS and the PLP, to be able to communicate the connection between MTSS and the PLP to other stakeholders, and to participate productively in a problem of practice protocol. To help us meet those objectives, this evening I'm excited to introduce Trish Pora and Jessica LaValle. Trish brings over 20 years of experience as a classroom teacher, reading specialist, coach, and state education leader. She is now a literacy specialist at the Rhode Island Department of Education, where she supports statewide literacy work, helping schools strengthen instruction aligned to the science of reading and structured literacy. She helps implement high quality curriculum and uses evidence-based practices to do all of this. Her passion for literacy and commitment to supporting educators have made a real difference in improving teaching and learning across Rhode Island. Her co-facilitator this evening, Jessica LaValle, is a dedicated educator with more than 25 years of experience in both urban and suburban Rhode Island schools. Jessica now serves as a literacy specialist at the Rhode Island Department of Education, where she supports K-12 literacy, instructional coaching, and curriculum design. She's passionate about helping educators create inclusive, engaging classrooms that ensure every student has access to high-quality instruction. Throughout her career, Jessica has led district-wide initiatives and facilitated professional learning rooted in evidence-based practices, all with a strong focus on collaboration, equity, and continuous improvement. Please join me as I welcome Trish and Jess to this evening's presentation.
So PLP supports students who require intervention in addition to differentiated core instruction, which we've talked about a lot of times. And we want to say that interventions are systematic instructional plans. They're evidence-based practice and materials designed to help students achieve progress towards grade level goals. That's always our trajectory, is towards grade level. And we determine students' intervention needs based on screening and diagnostic data. We also want to think about what is grade level and what are those connections. Earlier this year, Allie Wilson shared this information about the TNTP opportunity myth, talking about the importance of high expectations and strong instruction and grade level instruction. TNTP in 2024 published another piece called the Opportunity Makers. And in that, the Opportunity Makers, they identified what are called trajectory changing schools, and they looked at 28,000 schools, and 5% of those schools had some common characteristics. They created culture of belonging, they delivered consistent grade level instruction, and they built a coherent instructional system. And they define coherence as listed on this in this text box. Can somebody read out what they have to say about what coherence is for us?
I don't mind doing it. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Sure, Carrie, thank you.
Coherence. Trajectory changing schools ensure all efforts fit together so students know what to expect and how to succeed. Each piece of the school's instructional program, curriculum, materials, interventions, and assessments work in concert with the others to advance the same grade level expectations, and teachers make those connections clear to students and their caregivers. Leaders make it possible for teachers to focus and caregivers to know where students stand and how to help, making students' learning experiences logical, predictable, and unified.
So thinking about both of these pieces from TNTP, and we know from other places as well, we want to ensure that we're building coherence across core instruction and intervention. And that means we're providing the same set of grade level student experiences for all students through Tier 1 instruction. Students engage in instructional experiences connected to core grade level instruction. And instructional supports prepare students to extend the core learning by covering the same topics or concepts. We know that this is not always easy to make this coherent connection, but this is what we want to work towards so that students can build their knowledge across their different experiences in school. So now that we've done a little bit of the background and those connections, Trisha's going to take us to look a little closer at the PLP specifically.
Thanks, Jess. We're going to jump in and we're going to take a closer look at the PLP and kind of zoom in on the process and cycle that we go through when creating a PLP, which is right in alignment with that MTSS process. So the first thing, if we look at the PLP process, it's cyclical because often multiple interventions are needed to support a student to read on grade level. So we look at the cycle, we have identifying needs, looking at the data, diagnosing and to determine and develop the intervention plan. Then we implement the intervention and we analyze the outcomes. And once we analyze those outcomes, we make the determination how is the student progressing? Are they on grade level? Are they ready to move out of that intervention? Or do they need a new intervention? And we continue that process. So the first step is identifying needs. What happens here is all students take your universal screener. Everyone has one. Students, we suggest K-12 take universal screeners, and this helps us to identify students who are considered at risk for reading difficulties. Once you have all that data and you take a look at it, your students are identified as at risk, you analyze data deeper and to validate your screening results. And this is where you may pull in additional assessments, you may give diagnostic assessments, you dive deeper and you look for data to support the identification of the students that are identified as risk, and also to look at their specific areas of need and make determinations of the specific skills that they're looking at. So you look at this data, you also, at this point, you're determining the type of intervention and the intensity of the intervention. So are they a tier 2 student? Is it a tier 3 intervention? You're considering all of those. Who needs a PLP? Well, multilingual learners, differently abled students, all students in kindergarten through grade 5 that are reading below grade level require a PLP. In grades 6 to 12, all students, including MLLs and differently abled students who are reading 1 or more years below grade level, also require a PLP. The district determines where that grade level sits and how they determine what is grade level. I'm going to turn it over to Jess to talk a little bit more about screening.
So as Trish was talking about, screenings are an indicator of risk. So that's the first alert, I guess, the first place that we look to see if students are below grade level to determine if they even need a PLP. And for screening assessments, we administer them to all students, that initial screener. They're quick and easy to administer, usually to large numbers of students so that we can get data on all of our students pretty quickly. We want to call out that literacy assessments, screening assessments, do not identify or diagnose disability. And we know that many of our screeners, especially in the lower grades, have dyslexia screeners, and those are not diagnosing dyslexia. They are an indicator of risk. They are not a diagnostic. And literacy screenings help us answer some questions. Like we said, which students are at risk or experiencing difficulty? How significant is that risk? And we'll look in a moment about how that, and many of you know the colors and the tiers, but we'll look at how those are named across different assessments. And in which general areas are students struggling? And sometimes we have to give some additional measures beyond that screener to help us really dig into where students are struggling. So we want to look at sort of the big proficiency descriptors across screeners and think about what this means for what students need for PLP. So typically, green is used to refer to students who are at or above benchmark, and most of the time, those students do not require a PLP. We know with iReady, there's also shades of green, shades of red, and shades of yellow, but below benchmark, typically it does require a PLP, and often we do secondary screenings to just dig in a little deeper to determine where students' needs are. And typically they also need targeted intervention. And then significantly below, we also may choose to do additional screeners. PLP is required and students receive more intensive intervention. We're going to take a look here, and there will be a couple of documents in the chat for you to follow along. There is on our website a pre-K to 12 screening guidance that covers many different assessments and the details about what they assess. For Rhode Island Reads or the CLSD grant, we narrowed down the assessments are in the pre-K to 12 screening guidance to the 5 most used assessments in the state that also are good quality assessments. And one of those you can see here on the screen is the iReady diagnostic. And at the top of the screen, you see the proficiency levels. At, above, below, significantly below are the levels that we talked on the previous slide. To the right is what iReady calls them. So they say on benchmark or no observed risk, approaching benchmark or some risk, or below or at risk. Then we took the measures that are used as an example for iReady, but we did this for multiple assessments. And we said, what is the typical battery? And does it tell us everything we want to know in terms of what Rhode Island considers important risk factors and indicators? And anything that has an asterisk next to it is the typical computer adaptive that all students have been getting. And then we said, does it include other things that are missing? We felt it was important that even though the diagnostic covers alphabetic knowledge, we thought it was important to do a fluency alphabetic knowledge measure one-on-one with the teacher. So we're asking Rhode Island Read schools to also do a CBM for fluency for letter naming in kindergarten and first grade. And we're also asking them to do an oral reading fluency passage with first and second grade so that they have some additional information beyond the computer adaptive. And all of those are in darker blue. And then you can see the ones that are in lighter blue are secondary measures that we recommend that if students fall below benchmark on the dark blue measures, that the secondary measures can give them more information to dig a little deeper to determine the specific needs that students have. There's a link in the chat to the CLSD screening guidance. So if you wanted to look at we don't have NEWA on there, but we do have the other assessments that you all put in the chat, guidance for grades K to 2, because those are the grades that we're collecting data for. But we ask that if it's something that you think is helpful to consider, how could we apply this idea of digging deeper with some other grade levels? Are there other measures that we want to ask teachers to give so we're getting more than just computer adaptive information on students? And that leads us into thinking about decision trees and maps for students.
Thanks, Jess. That's going to bring us into designing our intervention plan. So we've talked about this a little bit in the past. I'm going to go back to think about what Jessica shared earlier about the opportunity makers and the opportunity myth. And thinking about that when we design our intervention plan, we're considering the coherence across intervention in our core instruction. So in other words, if you are reading about pyramids in your core instruction, your intervention should align to that. You should be teaching about pyramids. You should be reading about that when it's applicable. The other thing to consider is, are there materials that are part of your HQCM that you can use to support those intervention goals when it's appropriate? You want to pull that HQCM in and use those materials to support intervention. We also want to think about who's providing the intervention, who's qualified. Remember that your qualified interventionist is someone that has completed science of reading proficiency training. And additionally, we're thinking about what we're using to monitor student progress as we go through and what the cadence of that progress monitoring is. Also wanted to bring us back to a tool that we walked through with Dr. Feinberg last spring, which was um, the roadmap. I gave you a shortcut on here, and there's a picture, but essentially this is your entrance decision tree that we're using based on our assessments and our target goals to determine what interventions would be most appropriate for students and align to our curriculum. So essentially, remember that our school team, our MTSS team, would work together to determine the intervention targets and what your tier 1, 2, and 3 interventions are that support those targets, as well as the progress monitoring tools and resources that you use, protocols that you use in addition to those interventions. So you have, the shortcut is in here, but you also have this tool from our session last year that we kind of worked through. And I know that Bridge is doing some work with schools that are working on MTSS around these mapping. I think there's also a math version of it. But this is something that your team should be coming together on to ensure that there's understanding as far as decision rules and interventions. Okay, so that brings us to we identify student needs, we design our plan, who creates the PLP? Well, when I was in a classroom teaching 4th grade 15 years ago, it was me, just me, all alone. I wrote my PLP and I provided all the interventions, and that didn't work so well. There's a team of people, stakeholders, that impact student learning. So that PLP team is larger, as you can see on the screen. It's the student, it's the family, it's the teacher. We pull in that MTSS team. Your building leadership should be involved, your reading specialist, all the way out to what are the supports that the students have access to that would impact their progress. So it could be a social worker, it could be a speech language pathologist is involved, it could be the literacy coach or the school counselor. So we need to think about who's on that MTSS team and who impacts student progress. And we want to pull them in and give them a say in what that plan is saying to ensure that we're meeting the needs of students based on what we know about the data and their targets and ensuring that they have the support they need. RIDE does not dictate how to store your PLPs or what they need to look like. We have state guidelines that tell you what is required in a PLP. You don't necessarily even have to call it a PLP. You could call it an MTSS plan. They can function as the same as long as those requirements are on it. You can store it however you want. What we ask is that LEAs have that coherent, cohesive system for documentation that allows it to be accessible for all. Ideally, if you have it in Aspen, you can download it, or you have it in Google Drive, you can download it. If the student changes districts, it should go with them. If they change classrooms or schools, it should travel with them so that we're not recreating the wheel in the intervention, that we have record of what is working and not working for each student.
So, like Trish said, now it's time to implement. We've got all the background. We know who needs it. We've made a plan. We've brought a lot of people in to help think about what should be in that plan. And the implementation of interventions is its own little mini cycle within the larger PLP process, because we're implementing the intervention and we're monitoring student progress as they move through the intervention. And we're making database decisions from lesson to lesson. And within that, we want to make sure that in the PLP, we're tracking some of those targets for small goals throughout. And you've probably seen trend lines before. So let's take a look at these trend lines. If we look at this first one, the goal line is here. So where is this student compared to the trend line? The first one. Above. So if we have a student who's on track to meet a goal by the end of intervention, we'll just popcorn out on this one. What are some things that you might consider throughout the intervention cycle for this student for next steps.
Going to the next skill.
Okay. What else?
They might be able to have a lower dosage,
Okay.
might not need a so intense of a dosage.
Okay. Let's look at this next student. Where are they in relation to the trend line for their data points?
All over the place.
All over the place, but below, right?
Yeah.
And also this last student, where is this student?
Way below.
Way below. So this student is making some progress, but pretty inconsistent and all over the place. What would we consider for next steps within this intervention cycle for this student?
Maybe increasing dosage.
Okay.
Checking attendance to see if they're getting consistent intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Group size.
Okay.
Fidelity of the intervention.
Great. So for this last student, I would imagine you would suggest many of those same things. Is there anything else that you would add for the student who is really almost flatlining in their growth?
Try a different program.
Mm-hmm. And maybe revisit the assessments that you gave too, to say maybe we missed it, maybe we missed something in our initial assessments. And certainly I think attendance would be an important one to look at in a case like this as well. So once we go through that intervention cycle, we've got all of those data pieces, we've got trend lines, and we've done a little bit of tweaking within the intervention cycle. We want to analyze the overall outcomes and determine next steps for that student. And then we return back to the beginning of the process to go through the cycle again. And for some students, they might have made grade level and they've consistently been there, and that's where we stop and we release them from a PLP. And for other students, we, like Tessa said, we might go into a new skill, we might do a new assessment, we might move what groups they're working in, change the intensity. We could do several different things if they continue to need supports, which many students do, we know.
The other piece of PLPs is linking that family and community engagement to it. So we want it to make it home. We want parents to be familiar with the process. We want parents to understand how students' progress is coming along as far as reading and what students' needs are. So we have a couple of things to share. We've got Literacy Learning Lab, we have an expert speaker series, and we have some teacher resources and family resources that will be coming shortly. Brand new speaker series this year. We have Lindsay Kemeny coming in December to talk about paragraph shrinking. We also have all the videos from last year on the website. Some of them may be appropriate for parents as well, but certainly teachers. We've included some sample intervention letters that could be sent out at the beginning of the year, the beginning of an intervention cycle, if it's a new student that's just entering intervention, or progress reporting. And we also had some end of cycle letters. There's tabs on the left-hand side of that document. There's a link to our RIDE structured literacy games for parents, specifically for K-2 students, that you could share with parents. It's family friendly.
At this time, I'd really like to thank Jessica and Trish for presenting to us this evening, really making some clear connections between the PLP process as well as the MTSS systems as well. I really think that it's important to take home that these are overlapping processes and really encouraging each district and every cadre member to really think about how we can work smarter and not harder for our students. And so at this time, I just want to review our session objectives. We really hope we met these for all of you this evening, but our objectives were to identify those direct connections between MTSS and the PLP process, to give you the knowledge and skills to communicate that connection between MTSS and the PLP to other stakeholders, and to participate productively in a dilemma discussion. And so we hope that we were successful in all of those this evening, and we will be staying on the call for a couple of minutes for anyone that has some lingering questions, but we hope to see you at our next session coming up.